This was never meant to be known by anyone. The story was hidden for 100 years under Kentucky clay and polite collective forgetfulness. It was a secret that the mountains themselves kept. Only the wind that blows through the dark pines of Appalachia knew about it, and it had been a secret for more than 100 years. Up until now. It starts with a sound, not a story, the sickening sound of a shovel scraping against bone. It was 1902, and railroad surveyors were blasting a new path through the Cumberland Mountains. This was a sign of progress on an old landscape. They were looking for bedrock, but instead they found a tomb. It was a natural cave with its entrance cleverly hidden behind a rock fall that they blew open with dynamite. They found the bodies of 43 men inside, in the dark, cold, and quiet. Skeletons piled up in the dark, their names lost to time and their stories untold. But the scariest part wasn't the bodies. It was where they were found. This unmarked grave was on the old grounds of the Millbrook Inn, which was once famous for being warm and comfortable, and for having 4 beautiful sisters who ran it. What happened? How did a place that was once a safe haven turn into a slaughterhouse? And how did it all disappear from history? The truth is a much darker and more complicated poison than anyone could have thought. A story of hospitality that was so perfect it killed. A story about power, seduction, and how easy it is for someone to just vanish. You need to know the light that hid the darkness before you can understand it. In the 1840s, the Wilderness Road was a thin line of danger and promise that cut through the Kentucky mountains on its way to the dream of the western frontier. It was a hard path, full of bandits, predators, and the harsh weather. The tired traveler, who was alone and worn out, saw the Millbrook Inn on a ridge above the valley and thought it was heaven. It wasn't just a building, it was a legend that people in taverns 3 states away talked about in quiet, respectful tones. The 4 Cunningham sisters ran the inn, and they offered more than just clean beds and hot meals. They gave you a feeling of being seen, understood, and coming home to a place you'd never been before. Merchants would change their routes on purpose, adding weeks to their trips just to spend a few nights with the sisters. Cattlemen, who were tough and used to the road, would risk dangerous mountain passes instead of missing out on what they called the Millbrook magic. People who made it through the trail would come as strangers, wary and sad, but they would leave with tears in their eyes, feeling like they had found something sacred, a memory worth the dangerous trip back. Their words were so personal and intimate that they calmed the soul, but they would soon learn that that warmth came at a cost that was much scarier than anyone could have imagined. The story of the sisters starts with a death, like many dark stories do. Jeremiah Cunningham, their father, died of tuberculosis in 1831. His 4 daughters were left to face the harsh Kentucky frontier on their own. He left them a huge 800-acre mountain estate with livestock, fertile fields, and the inn that was the lifeblood of their family. The sisters, who were between 16 and 26 years old, were now orphans in a world that didn't have much room for women who weren't protected. Margaret, the oldest at 26, had the sharp, calculating mind of a born financier, and a cold, practical personality that people would later mistake for cruelty. Not yet. It wasn't cruel. It was about staying alive. Catherine, who was 24, was the heart of the operation. She was beautiful in a way that seemed otherworldly and had an almost supernatural ability to understand others. She could make any man, from a poor farmer to a rich politician, feel like he was the only person in the world. It was both a gift and a weapon. Then there was Sarah, who was 22 and very quiet. She had inherited her mother's deep knowledge of mountain herbs, remedies, and their darker properties. This knowledge would soon turn the inn's kitchen into an alchemist's lab. And lastly, Elizabeth, who was only 16 years old. Her innocent charm was like a shield, a light that could put even the most cautious traveler at ease. As a whole, they were a perfect, self-sufficient unit, with each sister being an important part of the living thing that was Millbrook Inn. The inn was a fortress of comfort, and it was a character in their story. Their grandfather built it in 1798 when the road was just a dangerous footpath. Now, it was a strong, two-story log building with stone foundations that sat like a crown on the ridge. Two huge stone fireplaces that roared with life filled the huge common area inside. They cast a warm, hypnotic glow on the tired faces of guests. The kitchen was like a kingdom. It could feed dozens of people and always smelled like roasting game, baking bread, and Sarah's herbs simmering. But what really made the Cunningham place special was the trust their father had built. For 30 years, the name Cunningham meant safety, quality, and a warm welcome that felt like family. Jeremiah had made something more valuable than gold: his name. The silent people in the background backed this up. The foreman was Ezra Hawthorne, a weathered mountain man in his 50s. He was completely loyal to the Cunninghams and knew a lot about the mountains. He was the one who kept them grounded and connected to the past. The Zimmer brothers, Klaus and Heinrich, were also there. They were German immigrants who had come to America looking for a new life. They ran the farm with ruthless efficiency, and their cabin on the eastern edge of the property showed how hard they worked. These things came together in the fall of 1831. The sisters found their own special alchemy because they had to. Margaret's sharp mind helped them make money. They loved Catherine because she was so charming. Sarah's cooking made them stand out, and Elizabeth's youth made them seem harmless. But that very isolation, which kept them safe from the dangers of the frontier, was also a curse. It gave them something else, their own space. And for 4 sharp, desperate women with no one to answer to, being alone could be the best way to grow darkness. In November 1832, a man named Thomas Kellerman was the first sign of the earthquake that was to come. He was a 45-year-old man from Richmond who bought cattle. He had just lost his wife and had no kids or close friends. He was the perfect victim in every way, even before he died. He had a lot of gold coins in his purse, but the real weight he carried was in his soul. His horse, tired, stumbled up the path to the inn while it was snowing lightly. He was a man who had lost his way in a sea of sadness, and Millbrook Inn was his lighthouse. Margaret met him at the door, and her smile was a work of art. In one look, she took in everything: the sharp cut of his coat, the heavy slump of his saddlebags, and most importantly, the deep, empty loneliness in his eyes. A man is traveling alone a year after his wife died. He wasn't just carrying cash, he was also carrying a deep, painful need for human connection. Welcome to the Millbrook Inn. Margaret's voice was a carefully measured mix of professional warmth and real concern. Hi, I'm Margaret Cunningham, and these are my sisters. We'll make sure that your stay is exactly what you need. As Kellerman took in the scene, the warm glow of the fire, the rich smell of Sarah's venison stew, and the impossible sight of Catherine arranging fresh wildflowers in the dead of autumn, his eyes, which had been dull with grief, slowly brightened. This wasn't just a place to stay, it was a cure. There were beautiful, caring women here who would treat him like a man who mattered, not just a customer. He was tragically and fatally right. The sisters made Thomas Kellerman feel at home over the next 3 days. It was a symphony of manipulation, and each sister did her part perfectly. Sarah's meals were more than just food. They were feasts of resurrection. She served perfectly seasoned game, warm, crusty bread, and honey cakes that tasted like a sweeter, forgotten time. She was bringing his body back to life, making him feel the simple joy of being alive again. Margaret, who was smart, got him to think deeply about business, politics, and the state of the nation in long conversations. She didn't just listen. She pushed him and made him feel like his mind, which had been clouded by grief, was still sharp and important. Young Elizabeth's innocent laughter and wide-eyed curiosity made him feel like he knew a lot about the world. He told her about his travels, and the way she reacted made him feel like a hero in a great adventure instead of just a lonely merchant on a dusty road. But it was Catherine who made the big move. She was the one who cared for the wound he thought would kill him, his broken heart. On the second night, she found him staring into the fire with a blank look on his face that showed he was lost. The other guests had gone to bed, and the world was now just the two of them and the crackling fire. She came over with 2 glasses of Sarah's special spiced rum. The crystal caught the firelight like stars that had been caught. "You look worried, Mr. Kellerman," she said, her voice a soft song as she sat down next to him. "Sometimes sharing a load makes it easier." For the next 2 hours, Thomas Kellerman spoke, something he hadn't done in over a year, while Catherine stared at him with a hypnotic gaze. He told this beautiful, rapturous stranger about his late wife, Mary, and let out the poisoned grief that had been killing him. He talked about how quiet their life together was, how painful it was when they tried to have kids but failed, and how their home was so quiet that it still smelled like her lavender soap. Catherine didn't just hear him. She felt his pain. She leaned in closer, and her face showed that she really cared. She would sometimes touch his hand, which was a small electric gesture that seemed to say, "I'm here. You are not the only one." He talked until his voice was hoarse from holding back tears, until the fire had burned down to glowing embers, and until the room was full of ghosts from his past. Catherine moved her chair closer when he finally stopped talking, tired and emotionally naked. The space between them was filled with the smell of her perfume, which had a hint of jasmine and mountain rain. "Being alone is a terrible thing," she said quietly, her voice barely audible over the crackling of the fire. "A horrible, horrible thing. But it doesn't have to last forever." No one ever talked about or wrote down what happened next. It was a secret that was kept in that room's silence. But Kellerman's face showed the proof. The next morning, he ate breakfast with the happy, buoyant look of a man who had been reborn and found a reason to live again. He had changed, and he was already dead. Thomas Kellerman was sure he had found a new beginning, so he quickly added 2 more days to his stay. He forgot all about his urgent business in Kentucky. He was in a blissful haze those days, enjoying the sisters' attention and feeling more alive than he had in years. He started making detailed plans to go back to Millbrook Inn on his way home, talking about it as if it were a sure thing. He thought about what life would be like here, away from Richmond's ghosts. He gave Margaret a heavy purse with almost twice the normal amount of money in it the morning he left. "I've never been treated this well before," he said, his voice full of real thanks. "You and your sisters have made something very special here, a real safe place." Margaret had a perfect smile, and her eyes were warm and honest. "We look forward to seeing you again, Mr. Kellerman. Have a safe trip." But Thomas Kellerman would never get to Kentucky. 3 days later, they found his horse wandering around the Cumberland Gap without a rider. Kellerman himself had just disappeared. At the time, it made sense to assume that he had been killed by bandits or in a terrible accident on the dangerous road. There was no investigation. No one asked the right questions. The 4 Cunningham sisters were the only ones who knew the truth. Heinrich Zimmer, the quieter of the 2 German brothers, had been waiting in the woods half a mile down the road. He was a quiet, efficient man who was good with tools and used to doing things that needed to be kept secret. Kellerman never saw the blacksmith's hammer hit him in the head and kill him. He died with hope in his heart, thinking about the beautiful woman he thought he would see again. The inn was quiet that night. The fires were out, and the guests were sleeping in the warm, fragrant kitchen. The four sisters sat at the big oak table in the middle. In the candlelight, a pool of gold coins sparkled. This was Thomas Kellerman's money and his life. Margaret stacked the coins with the skill of an accountant. She had already done the math. This one thing had made them more money than a whole year of legal business. It was a revelation, a sudden, scary look at a new world of possibilities. "He won't be missed for weeks," she said in a calm, factual tone. "No family to talk to, and no close friends who expect to hear from him. He was going to a place where no one knew him. He was perfect." Catherine, who still had the kind and caring look she had perfected for their guest, said, "It was almost too easy. He was so hurt that he would have done anything we asked." She said it with a hint of amazement, as if she were surprised by how powerful she really was. They understood at that moment, when they were surrounded by the smell of cooling bread and the shine of stolen gold. They hadn't just found a way to make money. They had found a formula, an alchemical process that turned lonely, forgotten men into pure, untraceable profit. They had figured out how to make people go away. The mountains outside were dark, quiet, and uncaring. They were good at keeping secrets, and four sisters had just made a deal at Millbrook Inn, which was warm and welcoming. The deal was sealed with gold, not blood. The winter of 1832 was a test. The sisters were stuck in the snow and alone, so they had all the time in the world to think, plan, and improve the dark art they had found. What had been a desperate, opportunistic act with Kellerman was about to turn into a cold, planned system. With her knowledge of ledgers and logistics, Margaret came up with a clear set of standards for finding their targets. The best victim was always a man who was alone on a trip. He had to have a lot of cash or valuable items with him. Most importantly, he had to be cut off from everyone. No close family, no set schedule, and no one who would call the police right away if he didn't show up. Sarah's job changed from cook to chemist. She used to use her knowledge of mountain plants to make healing teas and tasty stews, but now she was using it for something more evil. She started to grow a secret garden behind the main house. It was a place where medicinal herbs grew next to their deadly cousins. Pokeweed berries, which could make you feel like you had cholera. Foxglove, a beautiful but deadly flower that could make your heart stop. And water hemlock, a fast-acting poison that left almost no trace. Her kitchen turned into a lab, and her spice rack became a weapons store. Catherine, on the other hand, became an expert at emotional vivisection. In just a few hours, she could read a man's soul, figure out exactly what was wrong with him, and become the perfect cure. Her heart was like a chameleon. She became a pious, spiritual friend to the deeply religious man. She became a well-read and difficult person to talk to for the ambitious intellectual. For the widower who was sad, she was a source of endless comfort and understanding. Her ability to be whatever a man needed was more than just a skill. It was a scary, hypnotic weapon. And then there was Elizabeth. Her youth and innocence made her the perfect cover for the whole thing. How could there be so much darkness when there was so much light? Guests who were suspicious and on edge, after weeks of traveling on a dangerous road, found that their worries went away when they were with her. She also became their main intelligence officer. Because she was friendly and disarming, she could ask questions that would seem rude coming from anyone else. "Where are you going? Who's waiting for you there? Are you on a business trip or a vacation?" She could get a man to tell her everything about his life, his money, and his travel plans without him knowing she was judging him. The last piece of the puzzle was the disposal, which the Zimmer brothers handled with cold Germanic efficiency. Klaus had found a group of natural limestone caves on the other side of the mountain, but their entrances were hidden. You could move bodies at night when there was no moon and seal them away, where the mountain's own chemistry would do the rest. They had made a perfect trap that no one could escape. There was a rumor going around at the time that a local preacher stayed at the inn in the late 1830s. This rumor never made it into official records. He left after just one night, looking shaken. He would only say, "The hospitality in that house is too perfect," when asked what was wrong. "It feels like it wants food." In the spring of 1833, they got their second victim, who was also a test of their new, improved system. William Fraser was a tobacco dealer from North Carolina. He was 38 years old and single. He was known to be a recluse who always traveled alone to make more money. He fit Margaret's profile perfectly. He arrived on a rainy April evening, soaked and miserable after a week of miserable travel. The warmth of the inn, the smell of Sarah's cooking, the sight of the 4 beautiful sisters, it was overwhelming. The sisters used their plan with the same care as a military operation. Margaret talked to him about the tobacco market, which gave her a chance to learn more about his finances and how few close friends he had. Elizabeth played the piano for him, which brought back memories of a softer, gentler life he had long since left behind. He started to make up excuses to put off his trip so he could stay with Sarah for one more day because her food was so good. But as always, it would be Catherine who would deal the final blow, not with a weapon, but with a word. She saw him reading a book of poetry by the fire. He was a lonely man looking for comfort in the words of others. She approached with a calculated shyness, her eyes wide. "I'm sorry, sir," she said in a soft voice. "I don't know much, but I do love how beautiful words sound. Would you mind reading to me?" William Fraser read poetry out loud to the most beautiful woman he had ever seen for 2 hours. He hadn't spoken to anyone else in years. His voice and the sound of rain hitting the window panes were the only sounds in the room. His voice got stronger and more sure as he read, even though it was usually rough and unsure. Catherine didn't say anything. She just listened and looked at his face the whole time, making him feel like the smartest and most eloquent speaker in the world. When he finished the last line, his voice was full of an emotion he couldn't name, and she didn't clap. She just put her hand on his arm, which was both soft and electric. "You have," she said in a soft, reverent voice, "the most beautiful voice I've ever heard." It was a simple sentence, but it meant the world to Fraser. The years of being alone and the hard shell he had built around his heart were starting to break and fall away. "I've never met anyone like you," he stammered, his words awkward from not using them. "You bring me back to life." Catherine's eyes, which were lit up by the lamp, held his. "Then don't go tomorrow," she said, her voice smooth and soft. "Stay for one more day. Stay and read to me again." He stayed for a week, during which time Catherine slowly and skillfully made him think he had found the love of his life. And every night Sarah started putting small amounts of pokeweed extract in his tea that he couldn't see. At first, the symptoms were mild, like stomach cramps and a little dizziness. Fraser, who was in the middle of the emotional storm of his new love, brushed it off as nerves, as the exciting stress of starting over. He didn't know that they were already taking him apart, molecule by molecule. Catherine asked him to a private dinner in her room on the last night of his life, the night he thought his new life was about to begin. The room was small and only had candles for light. Sarah made his favorite meal, roast duck with cherry sauce, and served it with a bottle of their best wine, which had a carefully measured amount of water hemlock in it. Fraser was sitting across from the woman he loved, telling her dreams he hadn't dared to dream in 20 years. The poison was already moving through his veins. He suddenly felt warm and excited, He probably thought it was because of the wine and the excitement of the moment. He didn't know it was his body's last desperate warning. As Sarah had predicted, he died of a sudden massive heart attack. It was a sad end for a middle-aged man who had gotten too excited about a night of passion. The next morning, they found him in Catherine's bed, looking peaceful. Margaret had added a great new feature to their business: a small, respectable family cemetery on the property. A carved headstone on a proper grave made it look like the person was decent and respectful. It was also the perfect place to hide, right in front of everyone. William Fraser was buried with great respect, and his death was called a tragedy. The Cunningham estate quietly took in his money, his wagon, and his horses. People said he had just decided to move to the West to start a new life, which is why he was no longer in the world. It was a believable story, and in a world where there are always new frontiers and second chances, no one had any reason to doubt it. The system was perfect by the end of 1833. It was a quiet, effective, and almost undetectable machine that turned men into money. Millbrook Inn had its best years from 1834 to 1845. Its name became famous, and people talked about it in the best places from Richmond to Charleston. The sisters had made an impossible situation: a remote mountain outpost that had the same level of luxury and personalized service as the best city hotels. Margaret was no longer just an innkeeper. She was now a powerful businesswoman. She grew their legal business by opening a small distillery for high-quality whiskey and offering guided hunting trips led by the stoic Ezra Hawthorne. These businesses made a lot of money, but more importantly, they created a strong public story. People thought of the Cunningham sisters as more than just hostesses. They were smart, business-minded pioneers. The guest book from this time at the inn, which is now kept in the Kentucky State Archives under sterile light, is full of famous people from the time, like politicians, land speculators, merchants, and adventurers. In Margaret's beautiful handwriting, they all wrote their names. Many of them came back, not knowing that they were sleeping just a few hundred yards from the graves of people who had died before them. That book, on the other hand, tells two stories, one of success and one of death. Because a carefully planned killing machine was hidden between the lines of real business. Catherine's ability to find the invisible men of the world, the loners, the outcasts, and the men whose absence would not cause any problems, had become almost psychic. During this dark time in history, Sarah's knowledge of toxicology became very scary. Her secret garden was a library of dead plants. She mixed different types of plants together, tried out mineral toxins, and made compounds that had certain specific effects. She could cause a death that looked like a stroke, a wasting illness, or a quick, violent fever. She kept detailed journals, not of recipes for food, but of formulas for death, writing down dosages, reaction times, and symptoms with the cold, scientific accuracy of a scientist. Elizabeth was no longer a girl. She had grown into a beautiful young woman. Her charm, which she had turned into a powerful tool for gathering information, let her sit with a group of men in the common room and, through a series of seemingly harmless questions and playful conversations, get a full report on each one: their money situation, their family ties, their deepest fears and desires. And Margaret was in charge, the grand strategist, making sure that everything went according to plan with the cold logic of a general. They said they killed about 30 more people during these years, and each death was a carefully planned and perfectly carried out operation. They spaced out the murders, never taking more than a few each year, so there was no clear pattern. They came up with a list of believable excuses for their actions, such as heart attacks, hunting accidents, or sudden decisions to move west, all of which were backed up by the testimony of Ezra or the sisters themselves. The cash came in, along with power. But something else was going on. The constant cycle of seduction, murder, and lies was changing them, making them harder and hardening their souls in ways they might not have fully understood. The inn's warmth was now just a show, and the hospitality was a predatory ritual. Think about Jonathan Waverly, a land surveyor from Pennsylvania who came in the fall of 1838. He was a different kind of problem. He wasn't sad or alone. He was alone, antisocial, and very focused on his work. He was mapping out the rough land for the state government, which meant he had to spend months alone in the woods. Margaret knew who he was right away. His long absences were planned. No one would notice he was gone for months. His dangerous job gave him the perfect excuse. He could have fallen off a cliff, been bitten by a snake, or met a bear. The sisters changed their plan. Catherine changed into a different kind of woman because romance wouldn't work on a man like Waverly. She didn't come to him as a lover, but as someone who understood her. She showed off an amazing, almost encyclopedic knowledge of the plants and animals that live in the mountains, which she got from Sarah's poisonous research. She didn't talk about the mountains as a beautiful place. She talked about them as a complicated system of life and death. She went with him on his shorter surveying trips, and over time, her stamina and comfort in the wild broke down his professional reserve. Waverly finally let his guard down one afternoon while standing on a ridge that was blowing in the wind. He said, "I've never met a woman who knew this land like you do," with a tone of grudging respect. Most people see wild places. You see the hidden order. Catherine moved closer, and the wind blew a strand of dark hair across her face. She said, "I've lived here all my life." In a low, personal voice, "The mountains can teach you things that books can't. They teach you about life, death, and the fine line that separates them." He was fascinated. He stayed for 3 weeks instead of 2 because he thought he had found someone who was intellectually and spiritually equal to him. Sarah was slowly and carefully poisoning him the whole time. Sarah's choice of poison for Waverly was an extract from the Amanita verosa mushroom, which is also known as the destroying angel. It was her best work of subtlety. It didn't kill quickly, it worked over days, slowly shutting down the liver and making symptoms that were exactly like those of the dreaded mountain fever, a real disease that had killed many frontiersmen. Waverly, the man of science, probably diagnosed himself with nausea, fatigue, and delirium, never thinking that the smart women who were taking care of him were the ones who made him sick. It seemed like his death was a sad but expected risk of his job. A merchant in another state bought his expensive surveying tools. His detailed, hand-drawn maps of the area, which were very useful for gathering information, were added to Margaret's growing collection. His body joined the others in the cold, quiet ground of the mountain cave. The Cunningham sisters were truly brilliant, not just in how they killed people, but also in how they lived. They built a wall of respectability around their dark secret. They were very active members of the Millbrook Community Church. They gave a lot of money to local causes, like building a new schoolhouse and helping families who were having trouble. Margaret was a member of the Regional Merchants Association. Sarah was the town's unofficial healer, giving herbal medicine to farms nearby. Catherine taught Sunday school, and her soft voice taught kids about grace and morality. Elizabeth planned the social events that brought the families living alone on the mountain together as a community. This wasn't just a cover. It was a way to control people's minds. It made them impossible to accuse. It would have been crazy to think about accusing them of anything because their goodness was so clear and real. Their money, which they cleaned through legal means, turned into an empire. They were no longer just innkeepers. They were land barons and moneylenders. They bought up huge amounts of land and lent money to local farmers at fair rates. This earned them not only interest but also deep loyalty and power. They put money into riverboat companies, and the money flowed down the Ohio River, mixing with the currents of real business. The Cunningham sisters were some of the most powerful and respected landowners in western Kentucky by 1845. Their story was an inspiration and proof of how strong and creative women were on the frontier. Local newspapers wrote glowing stories about the hard-working Millbrook sisters who turned their inheritance into a successful dynasty. They were the American dream, made real in logs and stones, but it was a dream built on bones. In the end, 43 men had given their lives for that dream. Every death added another stone to their wealth fortress and another layer to their unbreakable reputation. The inn was like a spider's web that was just right. It looked like a beautiful, complicated piece of art shining in the morning sun, but it was a trap. And for the men who got caught in its silky threads, there was no way out. The descent into the web was always the same, warm, comforting, and deadly. It wasn't the kick of a sheriff's door or the accusation of a grieving relative that started the end. It came from inside, as it so often does a rot that started in their own foundation. Heinrich Zimmer, the younger of the two German brothers, was the source. He had a broken leg from a hunting accident in 1849 and had to rely on laudanum to ease the pain. But the opiate didn't just calm his body, it also calmed the ghosts. Heinrich had always been the more sensitive of the two, and almost 20 years of being involved in the crime had made him feel empty. The men he had helped bury came to him in his dreams. Sarah prescribed laudanum, which became his only way out, but the addiction turned him into a new kind of monster, paranoid, moody, and afraid of what he would say. The crisis started on a very cold morning in February 1850. Heinrich stood in the kitchen doorway, his eyes wide with fear from drugs. Sarah was alone, making breakfast for a North Carolina merchant who was going to be their next victim. Heinrich whispered, "I can't do it anymore." And his body shook. "I see their faces every night when I go to sleep. They are all there, looking at me. Sarah, there are 43 of them. 43 souls are crying out." Sarah's face was calm, but her mind was racing with the numbers. Heinrich was no longer useful. He was a ticking time bomb, holding the information that could get them all hanged. "You're not well, Heinrich," Sarah said, her voice full of concern as she walked over to him. "The laudanum is messing with your mind. You think things are happening." "No." His voice got so high that it sounded like he was screaming, and Sarah looked up at the ceiling where the guest was sleeping. "I know what we've done. I know what you made me do, and I know it has to end. God won't forgive us." She worked for an hour to calm him down, and her words were like a soothing balm on his frayed nerves. He cried, got angry, and told her everything. She listened and nodded in perfect understanding. She finally convinced him to return to his cabin, promising they would talk later after he had wrested a promise she had no intention of keeping. Heinrich Zimmer had become a problem, and at Millbrook Inn, problems were always gotten rid of. Sarah made a special dinner for the Zimmer brothers that night. She told Klaus that it was a way to thank him for all the years of loyal service. The meal was a feast, featuring all of Heinrich's favorite dishes, and in the spiced wine, a celebratory drink, she mixed a massive, concentrated dose of foxglove extract. Heinrich died in his sleep. His death was caused by a heart problem, which was sad but not surprising given his health. Klaus, who drank less, lived, but the poison hurt his heart for good, making him weak, frail, and ironically completely reliant on Sarah's medical care. The immediate danger was gone, but the fix had made things worse by making a new, more dangerous problem. Klaus was hurt, but he wasn't stupid. He had seen the signs in their guests before, and now, as he mourned his brother, the seeds of doubt began to grow in the rich soil of his fear. The perfect machine was starting to fail. Margaret, always the planner, saw the change. Their perfect system, which was based on complete trust and secrecy, was falling apart. For the first time in almost 20 years, they were in danger. She quietly started making backup plans, selling off some of her assets, getting cash, and getting ready for the possibility that they might have to disappear completely, just like their victims had. Samuel Hartwell, a cotton broker from Savannah, was their last guest. He would unknowingly bring the whole house of cards down. He came in March 1851, a widower in his 50s, with more than $1,000 in gold and banknotes. He was lonely, rich, and cut off from others, which fit the profile. The sisters went through the motions, and their performance was as good as ever. Catherine made him feel like he had a friend, and Hartwell died of what looked like a heart attack on his third night. But they messed up a small, simple, terrible mistake. Hartwell wasn't just wandering around. He had a plan. He had set up a meeting with a business partner in Pittsburgh for a certain day. His co-worker, who was persistent and powerful, started asking questions when he didn't show up. The questions made their way down the wilderness road from town to town until they reached the desk of Millbrook County Sheriff Thomas Brennan. Brennan was a smart, experienced police officer. He had heard the rumors and whispers about Millbrook Inn for years, but he had always thought they were just gossip from the frontier. But this question was different. It was official, and people from other states were pushing for it. Sheriff Brennan's first investigation was normal. He rode up to the inn, and Margaret and Ezra told their story, which they had practiced a lot. Yes, Mr. Hartwell had stayed with them and was a perfect gentleman. He left for the north on the morning of March 12th in good health. The guest list proved it. It all made perfect sense. Brennan, on the other hand, was a man who paid attention to details. A blacksmith in the next county remembered putting shoes on a horse that looked like Hartwell's, but this was 2 days after he was supposed to have left the inn. A store owner remembered selling things to a man who looked like Hartwell, but the timing was wrong again. These were small differences that were easy to explain away. A man could have gotten his dates wrong, or his memory could have been off. But the little things that didn't add up bothered Brennan. They felt like little bumps in a blanket that was woven perfectly. He started to pull on the threads. He began looking through old county records for other reports of missing people and other questions about travelers who were last seen in the area. He thought he would find a few, which is normal for doing business on a dangerous frontier. He didn't think he would find 15. There have been 15 official cases in the past 20 years, and they all have one thing in common: Millbrook Inn. The statistical oddity was mind-blowing. It wasn't just a coincidence anymore. It was a pattern. The old preacher's talk about hungry hospitality suddenly seemed eerily accurate. The lovely, welcoming inn on the hill started to look less like a safe place and more like the center of a web. Brennan knew that what he was up against was much more complicated than just bandits. The Cunninghams were well-respected, powerful, and deeply rooted in the community. They would be warned if someone made a direct accusation. He had to move slowly and carefully. The broken, grieving Klaus Zimmer was the last person he thought would help him. Brennan saw him on one of his rare trips to town. His body was weak and his eyes were haunted. Brennan brought up his dead brother in what seemed like a casual conversation outside the general store. Klaus lost his cool. "My Heinrich," he stammered, his German accent full of feeling. He was having problems before he died. He talked about things at night that kept him from sleeping. Klaus looked around, and you could see how scared he was. "Many secrets are hidden in the mountains, Sheriff. Some of them shouldn't stay buried." It was hard to understand, but it was enough. Brennan heard the plea of a man who was desperate to get rid of his problems. He set up a secret meeting that was far away from the inn's watchful eyes. The story finally came out in the safety of a quiet barn. Klaus's confession was full of fear and guilt. He couldn't say the word murder, but he talked about going to the mountain caves late at night, the strange deaths of rich guests, and how scared his brother was in his last days. He gave Brennan what he needed: enough evidence not only to look into one missing person, but also to break up a criminal organization that had been going on for 20 years. The raid was planned for the morning of April 15th, 1851. Sheriff Brennan put together a group of 8 armed deputies and 2 federal marshals because he knew he needed help from outside the sisters' power. In the early morning fog, they surrounded the property and blocked off all escape routes. The sisters' reaction was a lesson in how to stay calm and collected. Margaret opened the door for Brennan and looked concerned but polite. She offered to help in any way she could. Catherine looked truly heartbroken when she heard that their home might be linked to any illegal activity. Sarah was a great hostess to the end, offering the deputies coffee and breakfast. Elizabeth looked like a scared and confused girl stuck in a horrible nightmare. But the show couldn't hide the physical proof. The search of the main house slowly and methodically revealed horrible things. They found Samuel Hartwell's engraved silver pocket watch in a locked chest in Margaret's room. There was a portfolio of business papers belonging to Thomas Kellerman, their first victim, in a desk drawer, and in a small wooden box there are a locket, a wedding band, and a faded picture of a child, gifts from many different men. The most damning discovery was in Sarah's rooms. Her secret garden was a pharmacy for death. She had a lot of books on botany and chemistry, which showed that she knew a lot about toxicology, which was unusual for a simple mountain woman. They found her journals hidden under a loose floorboard. They were full of detailed notes about how to make her poisons, how much to give them, and what effects they had. The entries matched up eerily with the dates of their guests' deaths. When a scared Klaus Zimmer promised to be lenient, he took them to the caves, where the last horrible truth came out. The deputies had to move a big rock out of the way to get to the dark, narrow entrance. The air that came out was cold and smelled like wet earth and something else, something old and sad. The sisters' full evil was shown inside by the flickering light of their lanterns. There were a lot of skeletons in heaps and piles. 43 men still wearing the rotting remains of their nice travel clothes. The light from the lantern shone on belt buckles, boot heels, and the gold fillings in the teeth of a dead man. The cave was a quiet, underground museum of their crimes. Even though it was very basic, the forensic examination told the story of each death. Some skulls had holes in the base, which showed that a fast, sharp tool was used on a person who was already unconscious. Some of the bodies had bruises that looked like they had been strangled, and the bones of a few men were discolored, which was a sure sign of the heavy metal poison Sarah had perfected. They also found treasure troves of gold coins, banknotes, jewelry, and other valuable personal items that were worth a lot of money. The famous Millbrook Inn had been nothing more than a very effective slaughterhouse, a place where people were turned into money. The story was over. Finally, the monster was shown. The trial of the Cunningham sisters was a big deal all over the country. Reporters from newspapers in Boston, New Orleans, and other cities went to the small Kentucky courthouse to get every juicy detail. 4 beautiful, smart women who were secretly the most prolific serial killers in American history made the story impossible to resist. The prosecution, led by the tough Commonwealth's attorney Daniel Hutchinson, presented a huge amount of proof that couldn't be disputed. The evidence from Klaus Zimmer, the stolen items, Sarah's poisoned journals, and the horrible discovery in the caves all pointed to a cold, planned conspiracy that lasted for 20 years. The sisters on the stand acted exactly how they would have. Margaret wouldn't back down, and she stayed calm. She said it was all a plot, and that people who were jealous of their success had planted the proof. She never changed her mind or showed any sign of weakness. Catherine, the emotional artist, fell apart completely. Her testimony was a long, tearful mess that went back and forth between crazy denials and dramatic confessions that made everyone look bad, even her. The quiet alchemist Sarah would not say a word. She sat through the whole trial with a stoic, unreadable look on her face. The jury took her silence as the most serious admission of guilt. Elizabeth, the youngest, acted like a victim. She said that as a child, her older sisters had forced and controlled her, and she was too scared to say anything. She cried, begged, and begged for mercy. The defense attorney, Marcus Fairfield, who was a good speaker, tried to make them look like victims of their situation. 4 orphaned women alone and defenseless on a dangerous frontier, forced to do desperate things to stay alive. He said that their gender and the harshness of their environment should be taken into account as factors that lessen their guilt. But it was hard to argue against the scary fact that there were 43 skeletons. The size of their operation, how long it lasted, and how cold-blooded it was made any sympathy impossible. The jury talked about it for less than 3 hours. The jury found Margaret, Catherine, and Sarah guilty of first-degree murder on multiple counts. The punishment was death by hanging. Elizabeth was spared the gallows because she was young when the crime started, and because she acted like a coerced victim. She was given a life sentence with no chance of parole. On a gray, cloudy morning in October 1851, the 3 oldest Cunningham sisters were taken to the gallows. There were hundreds of people there to watch. Margaret faced her death with the same cold, logical calm that she had lived her life with. She didn't say anything, but Catherine and Sarah stood together, holding hands, as the nooses were put around their necks. This was a final, silent act of sisterly solidarity that sent chills down their spines, like the pact they made so many years ago at their kitchen table. The trapdoor opened, and the Sisters of Millbrook Inn's dark reign came to an end. The effects lasted for years, showing how much of a shock the case had on the whole country. Elizabeth Cunningham was sent to the Kentucky State Penitentiary, where she would live in silence for the next 37 years. Records from prison show that she never had a visitor and always said she was innocent until she died of the flu in 1888. There were no letters, confessions, or explanations left behind. She kept her secrets until she died. Klaus Zimmer disappeared after being promised protection for his testimony. After the trial, he left town, a man tormented by what he had done and what he had seen. People said he was in Ohio, then Missouri, but he was a ghost who was always looking over his shoulder. Ezra Hawthorne, the loyal foreman, was found guilty of being an accessory. He stayed ignorant until the end, saying he really believed the sisters' stories. In 1854, he died in jail. The Millbrook Inn itself turned into a cursed place. It was sold at auction, but no one wanted to live or work there. For years, it stood empty, a dark reminder of the terrible things that had happened there. Then a mining company bought the land, tore down the building, and erased it from the landscape. The cave, which was the tomb of the 43, was permanently closed by court order. A simple stone marker was put up at the site with the sad message, "Here lie unknown travelers, 18,321,851. May they find peace in death that they couldn't find in life." The case made people face the truth. The Cunningham laws were passed all over the area. They made it necessary for guests to register, for any death at an inn to be reported, and for regular inspections. The time of being alone without any help was over. The story turned into a cautionary tale, a dark piece of American folklore about the evil that exists in remote places, hidden behind a mask of civility. Modern criminologists see the Cunningham sisters as a very successful criminal group. They had everything: careful choice of victims, advanced methods, a foolproof way to get rid of bodies, and the best cover story. People often say that Margaret is a classic corporate psychopath because she has the brains, charm, and complete lack of empathy needed to pull off such a long-running conspiracy. People think Catherine has a serious personality disorder because she can copy other people's feelings to create strong predatory attachments. Sarah's obsession with poison indicates a sadistic desire for control and a profound scientific interest in the mechanisms of death. Elizabeth is still a mystery. Was she a scared accomplice, a real victim of her sister's tricks, or was her innocent act the smartest thing she could have done? We might never find out. The truth about her role is buried with her, which is one of the inn's many secrets. The Millbrook Inn is still terrifying, but not because of the horror. It's because of how well it works. If Heinrich Zimmer's conscience, helped by laudanum, hadn't broken him, or if Sheriff Brennan hadn't been so careful, the operation could have gone on for another 20 years. How many more men would have ended their journeys in that warm, friendly common room? How many more skeletons would have been in the dark caves on the side of the mountain? The fact that they found it by chance is a scary reminder of a scary possibility, that they might not have been the only ones. How many other dark spots on the map were there where the isolation was so deep that screams couldn't be heard, and where charming hosts preyed on the lonely and lost? The story of the Cunningham sisters shows how easy it is for travelers to be hurt. Before people could talk to each other right away, a man could leave one town and never show up in the next. His absence might not even cause a ripple for months, if ever. The sisters didn't just take advantage of this weakness. They used it as a weapon. They made the idea of hospitality, or giving a stranger a place to stay, into a form of art that is predatory. Maybe their biggest crime wasn't the murders themselves, but the way they broke trust. They turned one of the most basic human decencies into a trap. Even today, the story lives on in strange ways in the hills of western Kentucky. Some stories have turned the sisters into witches, supernatural seductresses who used magic to trick men into death. Maybe it's easier to believe this story. It's easier to believe they were monsters of myth than monsters of flesh and blood. If they were just women, what does that say about how dark a person can be behind a friendly smile? People say that the land itself holds the memory. Hunters and hikers still say that the air around the old inn grounds is strangely cold, and that there is a deep, unnatural silence where even the birds won't sing. After a heavy rain, they say they find old, rusty buttons or tarnished silver cufflinks in the dirt. These are the last things left behind by the men who disappeared. The Cunningham case file is still in the state archives. It's a thick, heavy book of horror. It has Margaret's detailed financial records, Sarah's notes on plants, the deputy's sworn statement, and the old, faded, sepia-toned pictures of the excavation. It is one of the most complete records of a serial killing operation in the 1800s that we have. This is proof that it really happened. The story of Millbrook Inn makes us think about an uncomfortable question. What does evil really look like? We think it will be ugly, mean, and clear. We don't look for monsters behind the desk of a famous inn. We look for them in the dark. The sisters weren't evil spirits hiding in the woods. They were well-respected members of their community. They were business leaders, Sunday school teachers, and people who gave money to good causes. They didn't hide the deepest darkness in a dungeon. They hid it behind a mask of complete, unquestionable respectability. Their best weapon wasn't poison or a blacksmith's hammer. It was their knowledge of how people work. They were aware that a lonely man is an easy target. They knew that a man who was desperate for connection, warmth, and the feeling of being seen would willingly walk into any trap that felt like home. They didn't just kill their victims. They first seduced their souls. They gave them a perfect, beautiful dream right before killing them in a cold, ugly way. and that is a cruel act that goes beyond murder. It goes against the spirit. It reminds us that the most dangerous predators are not the ones who hunt our bodies, but the ones who hunt our hope. The 43 people, the cattle buyer, the merchant, the surveyor each had a life, a story, and a set of hopes and regrets. All of it was erased for a few pieces of gold. They came to Millbrook Inn to get away from the cold, and for a while they found real warmth there. They were given the best gift, a sense of belonging, just before everything was taken away from them. Does that make the crime better or a million times worse? That is the question that hangs in the air of the mountains, the last scary secret of the Millbrook Inn. There are a lot of lonely roads and welcoming lights in the world, and we're all tired travelers looking for a little warmth. You know now.